Welcome to Elite Academic Hub today. We are beginning an in-depth exploration of the French Revolution, a monumental event that fundamentally reshaped the course of modern history and the concept of human rights. To truly grasp why this revolution was so explosive, we first need to understand the political landscape of 18th century France. Before 1789, France was ruled by an absolute monarchy under the Bourbon dynasty, led by King Louis XVI. Now, what exactly is an absolute monarchy? Imagine a massive corporation where the CEO is also the owner, the sole judge, and the person who writes every single rule in the HR manual. There were no checks, no balances, and no parliament to stop him. This power was justified by the divine right of kings, a belief that the king was chosen by God himself, making his word the final law of the land. In this system, you weren't a citizen with rights, you were a subject who owed total obedience to the crown. To truly understand the explosion of 1789, we must look at the structural foundation of France, known as the Old Regime. This was a society built on the ideas of the Middle Ages, where your birth determined your entire destiny. In this era, France was not a nation of equal citizens, but a collection of subjects divided into three rigid categories called estates. Imagine a world where the law changed depending on who your father was. This system was designed to keep power and wealth concentrated at the very top, while the vast majority of the population struggled in the shadows. The monarch, King Louis XVI, sat at the pinnacle of this pyramid, ruling with absolute authority. There was no constitution to protect you, no independent courts to hear your pleas, and no way to change your status through hard work alone. By the late 18th century, this ancient structure was beginning to crack under the weight of modern problems. While the rest of the world was starting to talk about liberty, France remained trapped in a system that favored the few and ignored the many. It was a social pressure cooker, where the steam of resentment had been building up for decades, waiting for the right moment to burst. Let's see these three groups. The first estate consisted of the clergy. These were the high-ranking officials of the Catholic Church. They were immensely wealthy, owned nearly 10% of the best land in France, yet they were exempt from paying almost all taxes. Then the second estate, the nobility. These were the aristocrats and landowners who held the most prestigious positions in the government, the military, and the king's court. They also enjoyed a life of luxury and privilege, but didn't pay tax. Finally, we have the third estate. This group represented an incredible 98% of the population. It included poor farmers, wealthy lawyers, doctors, merchants, and the urban working class. Despite being the heartbeat of the French economy, they had zero political power. They were the ones who paid the till, the tithe to the church, and various feudal dues to the lords. To put it simply, the third estate worked for everyone, paid for everyone, and was respected by no one. This fundamental injustice brought revolution as necessity. The economy of France was also not good. By the late 1700s, France was officially bankrupt. The primary cause was decades of expensive overseas wars, including the heavy financial support France provided during the American Revolution. To make matters worse, the royal family continued to spend millions on their extravagant lifestyle at the Palace of Versailles, completely disconnected from the national debt. However, The final blow to the old regime came from nature itself. A series of disastrous harvests and brutal winters led to a subsistence crisis. In 1789, the price of bread, the absolute staple of the French diet, skyrocketed. Imagine a world where your entire daily wage could only buy a single loaf of bread. People were not just frustrated, they were physically starving. In the streets of Paris, bread riots broke out as families struggled to survive. When a population has nothing to eat and sees their leaders living in luxury, the sparks of revolution are easy to light. This hunger became the ultimate fuel for the fire that was about to consume the monarchy. While the people were starving, they were boosted by bold new ideas. This era was known as the Enlightenment, a time when great thinkers challenged the ancient traditions of the monarchy through their writings. John Locke, in his influential work *To Treatises of Government*, argued that every human is born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. He believed the government's only job was to protect these rights. Next, Jean-Jacques Rousseau spread his ideas through his famous book, The Social Contract. He taught that a government only has the right to rule if it has the consent and the will of the people. Montesquieu published The Spirit of the Laws. In this book, he proposed the separation of powers, arguing that government should be divided into legislative, executive, and judicial branches so that no single leader could ever become a tyrant. These ideas changed everything. Members of the Third Estate realized they were no longer just subjects of a king, but citizens born with rights. They began to believe in a world built on liberty, equality, and fraternity. King Louis XVI took a desperate step. In May 1789, he called a meeting of the Estates General, an assembly representing all three estates that hadn't met in over 170 years. However, a major problem surfaced immediately: the voting system. Each estate was given only one vote. This allowed the first and second estates to join forces and outvote the third estate 2-1, ensuring the nobility and clergy never had to pay taxes. The third estate, representing 98% of the people, demanded a fairer system where each representative had an individual vote. When the king refused to listen, they took a defiant stand. They broke away and declared themselves the National Assembly. By doing this, they were claiming that they were the true voice of the French nation. They were no longer subjects asking for permission. They were citizens claiming their right to govern. This was the moment the political revolution officially began, setting the stage for a showdown that would change the history of France forever. As the Third Estate asserted its new identity as the National Assembly, King Louis XVI attempted to regain control through intimidation. In 20th June 1789, the representatives arrived at their meeting hall only to find the doors locked. The king claimed the hall was closed for repairs, but he was attempting to shut down their rebellion. However, the king underestimated the people. When they saw the locked doors and the pouring rain, the deputies marched to a nearby indoor tennis court. Within those humble wooden walls, they took a solemn and historic oath. They vowed never to separate and to reassemble wherever circumstances required, until they had successfully drafted a written constitution for France. This was a moment of incredible defiance. By taking this oath, the National Assembly was officially challenging the king's divine right to rule. They were no longer just a group of protesters. They were now a legislative body committed to a new legal order. This tennis court oath became a powerful symbol of national unity and showed the will of the people was stronger than the locks on the king's doors. The tension finally exploded on the morning of 14th July 1789. A massive crowd of Parisians, desperate for gunpowder and ammunition to defend themselves, marched toward the Bastille. Actually, the Bastille was not just a fortress. It was a terrifying symbol of royal tyranny and absolute power. In Bastille, king had imprisoned people without trial for generations. The governor of the Bastille refused to surrender and ordered his men to fire on the crowd. This sparked a bloody and chaotic battle that lasted for several hours. Despite the heavy fire from the fortress walls, the citizens refused to retreat. Eventually, the mob broke through the outer gates and stormed the prison. By the end of the day, the Bastille had fallen. The commander was executed, and the few prisoners held inside were freed. Tearing down the Bastille proved to the world that the divine right of a king could be defeated by the collective will of the citizens. It was the moment the common people realized they held the power to destroy the old world and build a new one based on the rights of man. 14th July would forever be remembered as the day the French Revolution became a reality. The fall of the Bastille triggered a wave of change across France. In August 1789, the National Assembly took a monumental step by decreeing the abolition of the feudal system. This ended the ancient taxes and forced labor. Actually, it dismantled the old regime legally. But did women have a revolution due? Absolutely. Women were active participants from the start, famously leading the march to Versailles to demand bread and forcing the king to return to Paris. While the Declaration of the Rights of Man did not initially grant them full political rights, women like Olympe de Gouges fought tirelessly for equality, arguing that rights must apply to all citizens regardless of gender. This revolutionary spirit eventually crossed the oceans to the French colonies. The cry for liberty led to the abolition of slavery. Influenced by the massive uprising in Saint-Domingue, the National Convention abolished slavery in 1794. This made France one of the first nations to recognize that human rights must apply to everyone, regardless of their color. These massive shifts proved the revolution was not just about removing a king, but about rebuilding society on the foundations of human dignity and universal freedom. The French Revolution was much more than a series of battles. It was a total transformation of the human experience. By challenging the divine right of kings, the people of France proved that political power belongs to the citizens. This era eventually saw the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who became emperor in 1804 and spread revolutionary ideals of legal equality across Europe. The legacy of 1789 continues to shape our world today. The principles of liberty and equality inspired democratic movements and independence struggles globally. We see these values reflected in modern constitutions and human rights today. The revolution taught us that while progress can be difficult, the pursuit of justice is a fundamental human drive. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to support our mission. We will see you in the next video. May 1789, Meeting of the Estates General. 17th June 1789, Formation of the National Assembly. 20th June 1789, the Tennis Court Oath. 14th July 1789, Storming of the Bastille. 4th August 1789. 1794. Abolition of slavery. 1804. Rise of Napoleon Bonaparte.